$765,342. Year-to-date expenditures is $377,264, which equals just under 50% of our budget, which is through September, we are 50% through our budget year. Our capital reserves as of the end of September are $542,055, and we have a past due rent summary as of 9/11 of $16,683. With that, I will turn it over to Mike. Anything you want us to, anything special that you want us to look at in the budget?
Everything seems to be going on track pretty well. I just want to note on the past due rent summary, we have two past tenants on there that have now vacated the premises, and I'm starting to work out a deal to see if we can get them on a payment plan. Discussions have started with Thomas James Photography. The Gendon and a Tea Hanger will be paid up here in the next week or two, and Stephen Smith is currently on a payment plan. So hopefully we'll be working that total down.
Just a question.
Mr. Kantz.
What's the status of Savvy Design?
I'm still waiting to hear back from the attorney. He's still in the process of doing the court filings. I've tried to make contact and have had no return on phone calls.
This is going to be a problem.
They're out of the space.
I'm not talking
Savvy
about,
Design is not.
Yeah, I mean the fact that we're not getting a good response from the attorney. And I've mentioned this to the township manager and suggested that perhaps we have our own attorney to handle landlord-tenant type issues because the response we're getting from the township attorney isn't timely enough, and we're losing money because of it. So I think maybe what we need to do is, as a commission, make that request perhaps, but talk to Mike, see what his issues are and what he feels.
I guess my biggest issues have been just lack of communication. There have been 2 or 3 phone calls and voicemails that have been left and no return, an email or two, and it's just a lack of communication. You have to be able to catch the attorney at the right time and talk to him. It seemed like he was having a problem delivering some of the letters, trying to set up a court date to the tenant. So there's just been a lack of communication and slow progress.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rakel.
Mike and Peter, are you talking about our new township attorney? Is that the attorney that the board just brought on?
Yes.
He's the one that is handling our affairs, yes, correct.
So our new township attorney, we're not having any luck working with us here at the airport?
Mike, give me an idea. I mean, how long do you wait in between phone calls or wait in between emails for a response?
The one for Savvy Design that I've been trying to get worked out, I mean, I believe I left 2 or 3 phone calls with voicemails and 2 emails and did not receive a response back for probably about 3 weeks until I ran into the attorney at a meeting.
From my perspective, that's unacceptable. I think we should have, why don't you talk to the township manager and indicate that the Airport Commerce Park Commission feels that is unacceptable, and we have a preference to bringing in our own attorney to help us with our real estate issues.
Okay, will do. I will pass it along to him.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rakel.
Just a comment on that. I sense there's frustration with our board liaison and our manager, which is real and cannot be underestimated. But forever, the township attorney has taken care of this facility, and it hasn't cost us anything. We haven't gone out to get our own attorney. I don't want to just throw out there, we're willing to go get our own attorney now for whatever reason that the new township attorney is not taking care of us. So I don't think that's the solution. I think the solution is to have a meeting, Mike, with Dale, and like Ron just said, this is unacceptable for this is real business here. This is not taxpayers' money we're dealing with. This is our business, and without a responsive attorney, it handicaps us greatly.
Just a comment, I don't think going out and getting our own attorney would cost us any more. I mean, whenever Mike talks to the township attorney, he gets charged for every 10th of an hour that he talks to him. So the fee would probably be the same. It wouldn't cost us any more unless we go to an attorney that's charging more, but I don't think that's necessary. I think we just need somebody that specializes in this type of litigation, because it is a special field, and if you get somebody that's on top of things, we don't run into the type of problems that we've been running into, and that's where tenants...
It's a different maybe debate, but the township attorney that we've had for many years that I've worked with in this setting with all these issues, there's never been a problem. So
Yeah, that is
anyway.
a different debate, I agree.
Yes, and my intent was not to hire a different attorney that's going to cost us additional money. I would agree that that would be a situation where whatever money would normally go to the current attorney would just be subtracted, and we would use that money for a different attorney that would respond to us on a much quicker basis than we're currently getting now. Mr. Nardone?
Mr. Chairman, I agree 100% with you, and the bottom line is if we're not getting service, it doesn't matter what we're paying if we're not getting a response. So the bottom line is, as you mentioned, the manager can try and fix this with Mr. Kantz, and if not, we should move on and do something different.
Is there any other comments or questions on the September financial?
Move approval.
Motion by Mr. Rathel. Supported by Mr. Stoll to approve the September 2012 financial report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Item number 6 is the manager's report. 6A is the DHS termination date. Mr. Duker?
These are two just brief items I wanted to update you guys on. I have been speaking with some of the agents over at the DHS facilities. I know the new building has started getting work done. They've broken ground on it in Gibraltar for them to relocate to. They have indicated to me, again, I don't know how accurate this is, but from their sources, they anticipate to be moving out in December or January. They gave me a number of a government official to contact to try to get an exact date. But I've had several phone calls there and haven't had a return yet, so I'm still waiting to hear back an exact date.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Duker on item 6A? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 6B, which is Watson Engineering Utilities.
As another quick one, I understand we've had some utility issues in the past with Building 61, 62. I was under the impression that there were separate utilities in the building now. After speaking for a long time with DTE, it's clear that there's not. There's one electric line that comes in and two separate gas lines. So what the setup is that we are paying for the DHS's utilities, but Watson Engineering is not. So I'm going to try to work out a deal. I think my preference would be to have Watson, if DHS is really going to move out in December or January, just have Watson pay for all the building utilities, and then I'll show them if we can come to an agreement on it. The bills for the last 2 years for the DHSs and pay the difference.
Keep us up to date at the next meeting as to how that discussion goes. Good. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Duker on the Watson Engineering Utilities? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 7, which is our action items, and 7A is the revised terms and conditions of the airport improvement grants. Included in your packet is a resolution that reads, based on recommendation by the Airfield Commerce Park Manager, the Groseal Airport Commerce Park Commission hereby recommends that the Groseal Township Board execute the revised contract terms and conditions of accepting airport improvement program grants with the Michigan Department of Transportation. I'll entertain a motion before discussion.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Kantz.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Nardone. Under discussion. Mike, I'm assuming that you have had a chance to have the township attorney review this, and was there any comments or questions?
I have not been able to have the chance to have the township attorney review this. From our last meeting, I was unsure on the Single Audit Act. I did clarify that does not will not affect us. We don't meet the dollar amount that's in the stipulation there. I also had the CPA review the rest of the new additions or deletions, and we did not see any conflict with that. And then I also brought it to the Airport Advisory Committee, who approved it Friday, our meeting last Friday on the 11th.
And was the document not reviewed by the township attorney because we couldn't get a hold of him?
Yeah, because of our lack of communication, I didn't think it would happen by then, so.
So we've got a CPA review, but not a legal review.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardoni?
And I see, if I could ask Carl a question, I see that the Airport Advisory Committee approved this. Do you have any insight into that, if you don't mind?
Basically, we haven't got any real choice. This is what the PennDOT wants to have, and so basically it's just a revision of existing conditions that we've already got.
It's basically a contract of adhesion. I mean, you're not going to be able to negotiate this a lot with them. It's pretty cut and dry. Take it or leave it.
That was the same discussion that we had at our last meeting. I think that was pretty much what was determined, but we had also decided that we thought it was in the best interest of the township to have the township attorney review it. Obviously, I'm disappointed that didn't take place, and leave it to the pleasure of the board whether they want to approve this or not without that review.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardone.
May I make a suggestion to the maker of the motion that we pass this pending township attorney review? Mr. Chance?
Just, I guess, a question before we do that. How much do we want to spend for this review? I mean, how much is this review worth to us? Because if the township attorney were to go through this entire document in detail, it would probably run us a couple $1,000s. And since I don't think he's familiar with this document, that's probably what he'd want to do.
Mr. Rathel.
I can't approve this without our township attorney reviewing this. I'm not really sure why all of a sudden dealing with our township attorney is such an issue and a problem for us as a commission, where now we're going to start saying, well, we really don't want them to review it because it's going to cost too much. We really can't have them review it because he doesn't respond to us. This is a major legal document, and it's very easy for everybody to say, the pilots, hey, yeah, man, that's how we get our federal money. Airport managers say, it's non-negotiable. Yeah, just sign it. I'm not just going to sign anything. It's not the way that we've done this. It's not the way that we should do it. And there seems to be a theme of an issue here with our legal representation here at the commission. I don't know where it's coming from.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Mr. Duker.
The only thing I was thinking of while reading this is that the contract's the same, and what you see on the front page is what has changed. So I would assume the last time it was passed, again, I would assume, I'm not guaranteeing that, but that the old township attorney would have reviewed this document and approved it back then, and then we should be concerned with the changes or amendments that have been made. But again, we could add the stipulation that it has to be reviewed by the township attorney before it gets approved. If you want to add that to the action item.
When is the date of, when do we need to have this executed by?
There's not a specific date, but for us to approve any other grants or projects we're going to get from the FAA, this has to be approved. So you'll see I have a couple on here tonight, action item B and C. This has to be approved before we can approve those, before we can move forward with those projects.
Are B and C timing critical?
The Phase 2 investigation, we were trying to get in before winter time, so that one would be a little time critical, but I think I could hold off until we get this reviewed by our legal team.
I'm sure that everything is okay. I mean, I would make an assumption that it is, but this isn't the way that you do this stuff. This isn't the way that we've done it. It's not the practice of a legitimate governing body like this commission. Because we have a couple projects that we want to get done, let's just, take an agreement that is how many pages long?
32.
32 pages long.
Yep.
And just pass it without our township attorney giving us the approval to do it? I'm not putting my name on it.
Okay.
Well, it gets back to, should we get an estimate first from the attorney?
No.
Well, come on.
Well, what do you mean, come on? We have an attorney in the township that we hire, okay, that we pay, we have a negotiated rate for. They're on retainer with the township here. And if we're getting waxed, if it's going to cost us $2,000 to have the township attorney review this for us, that's another issue that we need to take up with somebody around here.
Well, but again, it's the airport money. We need to be financially astute about this. I would like to have some idea what it's going to cost us before we just tell them to go ahead and do it and then get a bill later.
Or let's just pass it.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
May I make a suggestion that if the maker of the motion is willing to limit the spending on this, because I think it's probably reasonably a $1,000 deal, if he'd make the motion to have it approved pending legal counsel's review in an amount not to exceed $1,000, I would support that motion.
I'll modify the motion to that effect.
Okay, we've got a modified motion to approve the agreement with a limit of $1,000 subject to review by legal counsel with a limit up to $1,000 in support. Under discussion, I'm not sure that I am in agreement in limiting. I mean, if he can't do it for $1,000, then what happens? Does he come back to us and say it's a different amount? And I agree with Mr. Raethel that I am not in favor of entering into an agreement that, so what if we spend $2,000? If we don't and it costs us $500,000 later because we did something wrong, by entering into an agreement, then I think we're foolish in not spending the money that we need to review the agreement.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Raethel.
We have a budget that we pass and we send up. In that budget, we have a line item for legal, right? Did we know that this contract was going to expire this year and that we would have a new contract? And did we account for in our budget this year for a review of this contract? What's our legal line item budget this year? I don't have our budget with me.
Hang on 1 second. Let me look it up.
Mike, what's the length of the agreement? You know what the term is?
They seem to come out about every 3 years, but I think it's just until the next revision.
Mike, did we even know that this was going to be revised? I mean, when did we find out it was going to be revised?
I was not aware of it until it got sent to me, but I don't know what the previous manager knew at the time or if he budgeted for this or not.
It's dated April 12th, is what, 2012, so we would have already had our budget done by then. So I don't know that we were even aware that this was changing when we did our budget.
Well, it sounds like, if you're correct, I mean, they can change this whenever they want to, and whenever they change it, then we have to deal with it. So, I mean, we could do one of these every year, or we could do one every 10 years. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stoll.
there's a line item in here that says legal fees, $1,500 budget, of which we used $400. Second issue is, who says that we have to sign this thing?
The FAA or MDOT. To accept any other future projects or grants for them, we have to agree to these terms and conditions.
And yet, you're saying that they won't negotiate with us even if we decide that we don't like it.
I'm not saying that. I mean, they may. It seems to be a contract of adhesion where it's every airport gets the same contract, and if you have an issue with it, I guess you could discuss it with them, but I don't think they're going to be too lenient.
My experience has been, Mr. Stoll, that these are pretty much a take-it-or-leave-it type agreement. There is really no negotiations that go on between governmental agencies in these agreements, and if you don't want to enter an agreement, then you don't get their funding, and it's pretty much that simple, but if it's an agreement we don't want to enter into, then we would refuse their funding.
Mr. Chairman, this really sounds very strange. It sounds like we're discussing something that in the end will make no difference.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rayfield.
I think that all of the conversation that we've had regarding this is speculation. I think that myself, and I would speak for probably all of us up here, we all have a very good relationship with the FAA and Michigan MDOT and want to continue the programs that we have had and our projects going forward. So we have been very cooperative with the federal and state agencies when it comes to funding for these projects, to the point where we have bought airspace and removed trees and did all kinds of things, okay, to make this a world-class facility. With that doesn't mean that just whenever they send us a document that we just willy-nilly say, well, whatever, it doesn't matter what you require of us, let's just sign this document and keep moving forward. It's not responsible of us. We don't even know for sure whether or not this comes out every 3 years, 5 years, every 3 months, 6 months, or if we pass this and they can come out with a revision in another month. We don't have that information in front of us. We don't know whether or not, if there's anything in here that our attorney says, you know what, it would be better if we didn't have this paragraph, for Grozeal. If we could just remove this paragraph, we would be in a better position. We don't know if our attorney would say that, and we don't know whether or not the FAA would look at that paragraph and go, you know what, you're right, it's not a big deal to us, it doesn't matter, let's just cross that out. But until we do this in a reasonable and professional manner, we'll never know. We're just rubber stamping a contract.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nardoni.
do we know if there's a red line or black line version of this? I mean, we don't know if we're changing 50 words in this document or 500 words in this document, so we're kind of shadow boxing here, if you'll excuse the boxing analogy. But the bottom line is we don't really know what the changes are, and most of this appears to me to be boilerplate, and I would expect there's not going to be a lot of legal involved in that, but for what it's worth, I don't know. Have you seen a red line copy or version of this that might be more helpful? Maybe we don't need an attorney. Who knows? But it just appears to me that we don't know what the changes are.
Mike, the paragraphs that you've got outlined, are you the one that did the comparison of the old version and the new version?
No, what you see there is something I requested directly from MDOT of exactly what has changed from the previous to this current one.
Okay.
And that's what was sent back to me. Those are the only changes sent from the last time we agreed to this.
Okay, so this is from MDOT
Yes.
saying that these are the changes. So that's your red line version, Mr. Nardoni?
And I can go through those with you. I mean, the Single Audit Act is, we meet the central contract registrations, just making sure that we keep all of our documents in our office from the contractors when we do work. Under Section 3, number 5G, is basically stating that we cannot taxi an aircraft between an airport and a private property, so a plane can't leave the airport and go to your residence. 25A1, 2, and 3 pertains to returning revenue into the operating costs of the airport, which we meet all those requirements. All of our funds stay within the airport. 29A and B pertains to the airport layout plan, just says that we have to maintain one and make sure it's up to date, which we do. And 31A, B, and C pertains to disposing of land. I don't believe we plan on selling off too much land here in the near future, so.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rayfield.
I don't know if that 31A, B, and C is correct what you just said. So,
Okay.
I think that we just need to really understand. I'm all in favor of working with FAA, but just need to understand, all of us, what it is we're agreeing from a township perspective legally, and then, if we look at A, B, and C, and 31A, B, and C, does that mean that we're not going to be able to have any land released at all?
No, a lot of it says it just needs to be sold at fair market value is what they're big on in a couple of those paragraphs.
We've released land, to recreation, and I know that there's conversations going on now about doing some expansion there. Does this prohibit us from doing that, or,
Any other comments? Any other questions? Before us, we have a motion by Mr. Canton, supported by Mr. Nardoni, to approve the resolution as presented, with the addition that it would be subject to legal counsel review, with a limit put for the cost of that review at $1,000. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Rathel.
In light of some of these issues like 31A, B, and C, to have maybe further understanding of what that does to us, I don't want to approve it based upon $1,000 limit of legal. Unless, Mike, you're prepared to be able to explain exactly what A, B, and C does and how it limits us, and satisfy that understanding, I couldn't support even the current motion of approving it with the limit.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cantz.
Sounds like 31 is the only issue, A, B, and C is the only, we can just read through them right now and make a determination. I mean, I think if we want to get these other things approved, and apparently they're on for approval, then this has to be approved first, according, that's my understanding at least. So rather than kick this down the road another month, can we just read through those 3 paragraphs and decide whether or not they need further investigation?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nardoni.
if I may, a couple of quick questions to the airport manager. Do you believe the $1,000 number is a reasonable number for legal review of the sections that we're talking about?
Yes, if it's the certain sections, yes. The
Mr.
whole
Chair?
contract, I couldn't estimate a number for you, but I would say if it was to review the sections and get a clear-cut answer, $1,000 should definitely handle it.
But, Mr. Chairman, to the airport manager, my understanding is that those are the only changes to the contract, so nothing else should have to be looked at.
Yes, that's why I brought it as an action item. My assumption was that when the last time we received this, that the attorney would have looked at the changes, or at some point in time, the attorney has looked through the whole thing, and all we need to be concerned about are the new items that have been added or changed. But again, I can't guarantee that, but that would be my assumption.
Mr. Chairman, there's
Mr.
been
Nardoni.
good points by Mr. Rathel and Mr. Cantz, and I'm prepared to vote on this, up or down.
If there's any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No.
Do a roll call vote. Mr. Rathel.
No?
Mr. Cantz.
Aye.
Mr. Nardoni.
Aye.
Mr. Stoll.
No.
And Mr. Moran is no. Motion fails. The next item on the agenda, unless we want to have another motion on this item.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
I don't mind having another whack at this thing, I guess, because I know that is important. We need to show that we have a commitment, and I don't want people to think that we don't have a commitment to having, funds brought in through our federal and state agencies. And if you can take the time, Mike, if you're able to do it, if you can review paragraph 31, A, B, and C, is that what it was?
Yes.
If you can explain that to us in your thought, let me ask you this, have you read it and understand it?
A general understanding of it, but I'd like to look at it more and explain, exactly how it pertains to us and if it affects us in certain ways.
Okay, so then we're not, from an administrative standpoint, we're not ready, we don't really fully understand it either, so I think we just move on.
Next item on the agenda is item number 7B, which is the remarking of runway 422. And Mike, I'm assuming that without a approval of the terms and conditions of the accepting the Airport Improvement Program grant, that these cannot be acted upon? Or could we act upon them and then just once that gets approved, then these are ready to go?
I would say that would be a better route. We can approve them now, and then once we can come to an agreement on the terms and conditions and get it looked at, then these will get activated. So I can still hand these off to MDOT, and they will just hold them, or I can hold them until we can submit the terms and conditions.
Okay, we have a resolution before us that reads, based upon the recommendation by the Airfield Commerce Park Manager, the Groseal Airport Commerce Park Commission hereby recommends that the Groseal Township Board execute contract number 2012-0726, pavement marking of runway 422 with the Michigan Department of Transportation.
Support, or move, so move.
Motion by Mr. Rathel.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Stoll. Under discussion, I'm assuming that the motion should read, we approve this with the condition that the terms and agreement of the MDOT improvement program is accepted.
I mean, do we need to add that? It's just to prove it, and
Yeah, I'm not sure we can even go ahead with the project until that's approved, so I think it's kind of, you could kill it that way, or you can add it either way.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cantz.
I have another question. These two items are also on the agenda for the Township Board on Monday. Should we take them to the board if we're not ready to go forward? So I guess why are we even doing this tonight if, we're not going to take them to the board, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, that's all.
That was my question
And,
when I came to this item. I mean, we can put all three of these on the next board meeting. We'll just put 7A, B, and C on the agenda again once the agreement is reviewed.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Rathel.
I certainly understand, well, strike that from the record. I don't understand. Let's just pass them because we want the projects to be done. Again, we're making a decision, do we want this project, this remarking of runway 1735? And we can say, yes, we do, or no, we don't. There's another issue that needs to be resolved from our agreement with FAA, but that is a blanket agreement for everything that we do here. But if we show support of this project, it tells people that we do want these projects done. If we don't support these projects now, or we table them, then there could be in question our desire as a commission to do these types of projects. And I don't think that's the case. We're very much, or I am very much in favor of remarking the runway and doing the Phase 2 testing and other projects that we have scheduled. I'm very much in favor of doing this. We just need to work out the situation with our agreement. But I'd like to act upon these tonight and have the commission decide, yes, we're in favor of doing this, or no, we're not, as an individual project.
Mr. Nardoni?
Mr. Chairman, this may be out of order, so you can gavel me down, but I'd like to go back to the item that we have left on, kind of on the table. I'm not sure I understand, I mean, I understand the points being made that $1,000 may not be enough, but what is enough? I mean, are we holding this thing up over a few dollars? I mean, we can finish this whole thing tonight, get to a point we need to be if the board holdouts are because $1,000 does not seem like enough for legal review. Should it be $2,000? Should it be $3,000? Whatever it is, I mean, could we be jeopardizing our relationship with MDOT because we're holding these projects up?
I would have no problem approving the agreement with MDOT, subject to legal review, and whatever that legal cost is, it is. And I'm assuming that, Mike, you manage that process as you typically would do anytime we hire legal counsel, and I don't think it would be, I think it would be okay to request from the legal counsel some idea as to what the cost is going to be for that review prior to him doing the review.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cantz.
if we do a review of the document, is it just the portions of the documents that have changed, or is it the entire document?
In my opinion, as long as we know for sure what's been changed, it would be okay with me just to review the changes.
Okay, so is that the direction we should give Mike, Mr. Duker? Because that's going to determine the cost. I mean, if the attorney says, well, I have to review the whole document, it's 32 pages long, we know what that means. If it's just those few paragraphs that have changed, and the changes are actually very, very minor, I mean, that's a completely different type of review. So the real question is, what type of review do we want?
Mr. Nardoni.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to keep going back to this, but it's my understanding that this has been reviewed by legal counsel in the past, and we're dealing with just a few changes here. The bottom line, and one of the reasons I thought, without the support of this board, however, that $1,000 was the right number, because I think it's time, is because I think it's time to start managing our legal counsel.
Right.
And that was the point, being the $1,000 might have gotten their attention, maybe, maybe not. But forget that for a second. If this board feels, and I think to pass these other two items, it's critical that we pass the earlier item with the language perhaps that you or Mr. Rathel have suggested.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Rathel.
Joe, just out of curiosity, why is it your understanding that this document was reviewed previously by the attorney?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rathel, through the chair, I think somebody said, I thought somebody said that, maybe Mr. Duke or somebody said that our belief was that the legal counsel had reviewed this. Maybe I misunderstood.
I think it's just the assumption that since a document such as this had been approved by a board previously, that I guess you're just assuming that legal counsel has reviewed it.
Yes, I don't know for that for a fact, but I would assume that the base was reviewed and then every revision has been reviewed. But I don't know that for a fact.
And I would only comment that here we are today asking to approve this and being pressured even by members of this board because we got to get these other projects done to approve it without legal review. So I wouldn't really jump to the conclusion that what we have in front of us has been previously reviewed by an attorney, by our township attorney.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think
Mr.
anybody
Cantz.
here suggested that we approve without legal review. The motion that was on the table was put a limit on the dollar amount of that legal review so that we were somewhat fiduciarily responsible for what we're doing up here and not just giving a blank check.
Mr. Chair.
So the real question is, how much of the document do we want reviewed? And that's going to determine what the review is going to cost. So if we only want those portions that have been changed to be reviewed, that's one thing. If we want the entire document to be reviewed, that's another issue altogether. So I think we need to answer that question first. There seems to be a difference of opinion there.
Mr. Rathel.
It doesn't matter it doesn't, I'll say it this way, it doesn't matter what it costs. We have a contract, a 32-page contract, that we are binding the township and our airport into legally, okay? And we owe it to our township and our airport and our operation here that we have approval to move forward with a legal review that we as a board use, and that's the township attorney. Like Ron said, do we want to approve this and only do part of it, and then, you know, what happens in a year from now, we come back and something happens and it costs us $500,000? We've done this. We have a history of this airport, of this board, well, not this board, the airport commission, the township board, with the runway project. We had a whole big document, all right, that was like, well, that's what it is. You want the runway done, you got to do it. If you don't sign it, you don't get the runway done. So sign it. Guess what? We signed it. What happened? It was a disaster because nobody understood it. That's number one. I don't care how much it costs, and if it costs too much and it's not a fair price for our township attorney to review this, if it's not a fair price and a negotiated price that is below market because we have a retainer agreement with our township attorney, then that's another issue. The second point I want to bring up is that 31A, B, and C states that we are restricted or bound to some type of agreements with our land. And I asked the airport manager to just explain that to us. I'm asking anyone to explain it to me. Tell me what restrictions do we have? I mean, are we able to take some land and move it, for example, into recreation? Recreate some boundaries that we may feel are better for our future growth of light industrial activity here, by bringing in some, maybe some recreation activity. I don't know, are we restricted to do that? So forget about the legal review. I don't have a clear understanding of A, B, and C of what that is going to do to us.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stoll.
I just have a question about why are we having to approve $2,500 worth of contracts? Doesn't Mr. Duker have that authorization to do that?
I'm not sure your question, Mr. Stoll. Are you talking about these other items that are before us?
If you add the two, B and C together, there's $2,500.
No, he does not. These have to be approved by us with a recommendation to the township board, who then has final authority to approve these.
This money is not in the budget.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the money is in the budget. The way that the setup is, because we're accepting grants on behalf of the township, it has to be approved by the township board, and for me to take it there, I have to get it approved by the commission, because I have to be approved by the board to sign these documents.
Okay.
And the money, the way we have set up is we have an account that we budget what we estimate our local share would be of projects we're doing that year. This year we budgeted for $30,000 for a taxiway A lighting project that, if you remember right, as Mr. Thiel was on his way out, it's not going to happen this year because it came in over budget. So that's money that we can tap into for these two projects that are coming up.
And we are getting off our subject matter a little bit, even though they are related, 7A and B, and currently we have a motion before us by Mr. Rathel, supported by Mr. Stoll, to approve the remarking of runway 422. Any further comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Item number 7C is the Phase 2 investigation of runway 1735. And we have a motion before us that reads, based on the recommendation by the Airfield Commerce Park manager, Groseal Airport Commerce Park Commission hereby recommends that the Groseal Township Board execute contract number 2013-0017, Phase 2 Distress Study of Runway 1735 and Taxiway A with the Michigan Department of Transportation.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Rathel,
Second.
support by Mr. Stoll. Under discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cantz.
just a question. It's my understanding that those two items will not be taken to the board until action item 7A is resolved?
That is my feeling, that without that agreement with MDOT, these really shouldn't go to the Township Board. So whenever that agreement gets approved, Mike, you can then put this on the Township Board agenda.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
do we, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not 100%. On the FAA agreement, does that go to the board as well for approval, or does that just stop?
It does.
It does go to the board.
Yep. Moving on to item number 7D, under action items is lease approval for Dave's Hot Rod Garage. We have a resolution before us that reads, based upon a recommendation from the Groseal Airport Commerce Park Manager, the Groseal Airport Commerce Park Commission hereby approves a lease between Dave's Hot Rod Garage, the Groseal and the Groseal Municipal Airport. Formal lease will be developed pending approval by the Commission. Terms of the proposed lease agreement are listed in the history, purpose, and explanation section of this resolution. Anyone care to make a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Cantz. Any support?
I support.
Support by Mr. Stoll. Under discussion, Mike had a question. When you look at the lease rate that has been established for years 1 through 5 and option years 1 and 2, there is very little increase over years 1 through year 7. And obviously, we're sitting here sort of predicting what the economic conditions are going to be 4, 5, 6, and 7 years down the road. I do have some concern about us locking into these rates, not knowing what the future is going to bring. Hopefully, economic times will have turned by then. I certainly hope so. And I guess my recommendation would be that at some point during this 5-year lease and 2-year option, that we would maybe tie an increase into a CPI increase versus what we have here. I did some quick math today, and I think that the increases were somewhere in the 1% range.
Right around 1.5%. I got that from the current lease he has and some of the newer leases we've signed with scheduled increases. That was his request, was just the same increase rate for this year. That was what was on his lease we just signed earlier this year. But I do agree that it's not the biggest increase. So I guess one option could be is you could cut it at year 5 and have a bigger increase for the option years.
I am in favor of a lease, and I'm glad to sign a tenant up for this length of time and even with the option years, but I also do feel that hopefully, like I said, that the economy does turn sometime during this 7 years, and we'd be able to generate a little bit better rent than what's listed here.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cantz.
I had the same conversation with Mr. Duker this afternoon, so I certainly support your position.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
I actually agree with Mr. Cantz.
Okay.
I do have a question. These photos on the back page here, Mike, what are those of?
That is as the building currently sits. After the tenant moved out, we did a little bit of cleanup. So you can see the upgrades, or I guess lack thereof, that have been done to the building. So that's how it currently sits across the street now. The bottom right corner, you can see there, the dirt is an area where the cement has been moved and plumbing has been run for bathrooms to be put in for future use. So there are still a fairly substantial amount of upgrades that have to go into the building.
Who's doing that? Who cut that concrete?
The past tenant, Rush Fire Brick.
Oh, so they started this and then...
What you see in the project is, we gave, if you look at the sheet I handed out, I wasn't able to get in the packet, I missed that, but it was handed out for the upgrades given in Building 75 to the other tenant that's on the south side, Payette and Associates, and the tenant that was on the north side, Rush Fire Brick. And then there's what I'm offering, Dave's Hot Rod Garage. But that tenant was given up $100,000 in upgrades, and then was supposed to do those upgrades to the building, if you'll remember. And that's where the building sits today, and I guess is why the reason for the reduced rate on the current tenant for Dave's Hot Rod Garage, because he'll have to finish what was left by the previous tenant.
Do you have an estimated value for that?
I'm trying to remember what it was from our one meeting that we came up with. I believe it was 60. He had 40% complete and still had 60% left, somewhere in that ballpark.
What did you have a dollar figure associated with it?
So if you take this, it'd be $60,000. No, we didn't, because he did the parking lot up front. I don't.
So it's something less than $60,000?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that'd be a lot less than 60,000. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ray.
This is this is a sweet spot building, right? We've talked a lot, and I'm sure our conversations over the colder months are going to go towards a spec building and these industrial condo sites that have an office up front and a little area in the back, just like this. And I think that there's a lot of need for that, and we've seen this need because of the people that want this building. We've had a lot of interest in it. I'm not so sure with what we've been getting and what you're proposing is enough. I'm not convinced of that. And certainly I agree with the chairman when he said that the increases may not be enough, but I'm not so sure that even starting out is enough.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the reason that it was a lower rate was we had four parties interested in this, and they started dropping. The winery dropped out, decided it was too much money to finish the building, was unable to do it. Payette and Associates was examining it and then decided it was too much. And the third party, Dan Scroziel, I never received a proposal from. So this was what I was left with, and I think $1,300 is a little low, but if you look at the prices we've given in the past to the other two tenants, it seems to be about the middle of the road. And I guess my intent with this price was to, instead of giving a rental credit like we've done in the past where the rent would be somewhere like $914 like we did with Payette, it was just kind of a middle of the road, let him finish the building on his own dollar instead of us being responsible for it and having to monitor it so carefully and end up in a similar situation to where we were in the past with having a tenant who has an incomplete building and then is behind on rent.
Well, I agree with that for certain. That concept is a lot better than a reduction in rent. However, we haven't gone out, we haven't looked for all of the tenants that are potential tenants came to us, and I'm just throwing this out. There's an opportunity to see really if this is our sweet spot of rent and what it is. And we have one building that it's perfect. We have one building that's perfect with what we think is rentable space. Do we just rent it out there at a reduced rate just to fill it very quickly, or do we use it to find out what we can get for that, so for our future development. I mean, if we rent it for this, and now we start to do an ROI on a spec building or similar type structures, do we use this reduced rate? You say, well, that's all we can get. Well, maybe that's not all we can get. Maybe we could have got more, we just didn't make the effort to try to get more. We just took the first guy that came along, kind of a thing. I mean, it's a lot of work. So Justin, it's a lot of work. You know, it's not the easy way to do it, but it's not easy to operate this place.
Well, I do think, my understanding is that he's been a good tenant. As we deal with, from meeting to meeting, we have tenants here that we sign to leases that don't stand up to their side of the bargain. We have tenants that don't pay us, and as we discussed tonight, we have to hire an attorney to go chase rent more often than we'd like to see. And I have no problem with having a tenant that's been a good tenant for us, that pays on a regular basis, of entering into an agreement that's been negotiated up to this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Camps.
I agree with you. Right now, the building is unrentable. I mean, there are no facilities in it at all. There's no plumbing, other than the pipes in the floor. There's a big hole in the floor. There's, the front office is non-existent, other than some brick walls. We would have an awfully hard time renting this space out without even giving the future tenant credits or fixing the building up ourselves, which would be a huge expense. I actually think this is a very, very good lease, with the exception, I agree with you, that at least for the optional years, there needs to be some type of cost of living increase, because the increases at that point are a little on the low side, to say the least. But the tenant is an outstanding tenant, and I'm fully in favor of this lease agreement with that exception.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Reed.
this is a lease agreement in front of us, right?
Yes, well, it's a memorandum of understanding. What I did was, Dave brought a proposal to me with some numbers on it. I looked at it. His original proposal was for $1,200 a month rental rate. We negotiated back and forth. We settled out at $1,300.
But my point is that it is leasable, right? We have somebody that wants to lease it
Yes.
as is.
Yes. Who will complete the
Well,
facilities, who will complete a
so
bathroom in the front
let's be
offices.
clear. He doesn't want to take possession of that building until December, because he has an awful lot of work to do before he can actually move in. And he's willing to do that. That's why this is a good deal for us, because he's willing to make it inhabitable. Right now, it's uninhabitable.
But the comment was made that the building as is unleasable, and that we'd never be able to lease it. But we are able to lease it.
The terminology should have been uninhabitable.
Someone is going to have to make the improvement
Correct.
in order for a tenant to occupy it, and we have a tenant that's willing to make those improvements as part of the deal to occupy.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stoll.
are these rates gross or net in relationship to the amount of money that they're putting into this building? Are they going to pay this amount plus the money that they're going to put into the building?
Yes.
Or are they going to pay this minus that amount?
No. That was my intent, was just to do a cut dry, lease the building as it is right now, and then he will be responsible for doing the upgrades. So this is net. We will make $1,300 a month regardless of what upgrades are done to the building.
So in actuality, the gross rent rate is significantly higher than the numbers that we're seeing here. If you took,
Yes. The upgrades needed to the building and put it into a rent rate. Again, that was my intent, was so we don't have a reduced rent rate like we've done in the past with Rush Fire Brick, where, he's responsible for $100,000 in upgrades, and we end up in a similar situation to where we were.
so referring to the sweet spot that Mr. Raythal talked about, if we want to use this as a guideline for future buildings, we really need to have the real number here, so that is the experience that other people can look at, and then we will subtract from that the work that they do.
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, Walt just brought up an excellent point, and I'm okay with that. I think that this is too low, and I know it's going to pass, but I think it's too low. But for future ROI of our buildings that we're going to talk about, I think that you need to find out how much money needs to be put into that building to make it habitable, to use Peter's words. How much of that is, then add it to this, so that we have a gross amount of what it costs, and then we can use that number for future rents going forward to do ROIs on possibly building spec down the road, right? Does that make sense?
Mike, you have the number, you just don't remember it off the top
Yeah, I
of
don't
your
have it
head.
with me.
Okay.
I do remember
It's an easy
reading it.
calculation.
Well, it should be an
Figure
easy
that out.
calculation, and it's not 312, it could be, it could be 385 or 390.
Well, the other question is the amount of money they're putting into the building, is that going to be spread over 5 years or 1 year? In terms of the square foot rate?
It would typically be spread out over the term of the lease, which would be the 5 years. Any further discussion? Right now, we have a motion by Mr. Kansas, supported by Mr. Stoll, to approve the lease with Dave's Hot Rod Garage with the terms and conditions before us.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, maybe we can pass this with the stipulation that it has to be based on a CPI increase year to year, and that will show more of a true market value for us in terms of increases.
Well, did we want to do that for just the optional years or for?
It's up to the board.
It's not going to make a whole lot of difference for the first 5 years, I don't think.
My recommendation would be for sure years 6 and 7. Whether we want to do it for 5 too, I guess, is up for discussions.
What are we doing for other tenants?
It varies.
It varies, it depends on the tenant. Some prefer a scheduled increase, others accept the CPI.
So what's the average?
Average CPI, I believe, over the last 12 years is 2.2%.
So we're looking at a 7.7% differential.
Correct. In the current proposal before us, it's roughly 1.5%. CPI has been 2.2, so it's roughly 0.7. However, again, we're trying to predict what's going to happen 5
And
years
they
from now.
fluctuate, yes.
So who knows? I mean, it could be down to 1.5, or it could be up to 4. I mean, it's really a guess.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cantz.
I don't think we should nitpick it here. Mr. Duker and the proposed tenant negotiated this in good faith, and I don't want to get into the situation where this commission second guesses those negotiations every time, especially when we're talking about something that's less than $10 a month, or less than 1%. So I would prefer to go ahead with the lease as written, with the exception of the optional years, which I don't think will be an issue, because, I mean, the tenant has the option of either doing it or not doing it.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Stoll.
Can I ask Mr. Duker, if you had to do this all over again, would you have changed it to the CPI?
Looking at it, I would have changed the option years at the very least. The rest, I mean, it's a pretty minimal difference. Again, we don't know what it will do in 5 years. It could go up very high, but I would at least change the option years.
Knowing what you know now, what do you recommend?
I guess looking at the upgrades that still need to be done, I would recommend that we approve the first 5 years and then the 2 option years be based on CPI.
And I would just like to comment on Mr. Kantz's comment about sort of second-guessing the negotiations of the airport manager. And that is not my intent at all. I think Mr. Duker is new to the Airport Commerce Park, I think it's up to us to make sure he understands how we think in our position as it relates to long-term leases, and I think it's just a matter of him getting used to the way we think as it relates to those negotiations.
And I had no negative, feelings when I said that. It's something that I want to, sort of reinforce his position and make sure that when there's a tenant out there and he's talking to the airport manager, that he is in fact talking to someone who does have the ability to make these negotiations. And I think he's done a good job. I mean,
Yep.
we can certainly disagree with him by a percentage here or there, but
Yep.
certainly
Certainly
it's an excellent job.
say that within the framework of the entire agreement, we're pretty close.
Right.
Any other?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question to Mr. Raethel through the chair. What is the motion we're voting on?
Right now, it's a motion by Mr. Cant, supported by Mr. Stoll,
Mr. Cantz, I'm sorry, Mr.
to approve the resolution as, with the terms and conditions before us.
And based on the comments of the airport manager, I would like to propose that we modify it so that the optional years increases are based on the CPI.
Mr. Stoll, would you
I agree with that,
agree to support that?
yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no.
No?
Let the record reflect that Mr. Raethel voted no. Item number 7C is an addendum to the lease monkey business, and before us is a resolution that reads, the Groseal Airport Commerce Park Commission hereby approves an addendum to lease dated March 1, 2012, between the Groseal Municipal Airport and Andrew Bowman Jr. for the purposes of adding the rental of Building 70, Unit C to the original lease referenced above.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Raethel.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Nardoni. Any discussion? Any comments?
I have a comment, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Raethel.
Monkey Business, Andy, is one of those great tenants that we have. He's needed more space, and having that entire facility there now under his business of restoring classic cars and body work and all the things that he does is very positive for the airport. So I'm very much in support of Andy taking over that section.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardoni.
I agree with Mr. Raethel. I just have one very, very minor point. Sorry, Mr. Duker. There is no February 31 in 2015, so we may want to correct that, make sure the documents...
I will make a note of that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cantz.
I don't see where the start of this amended lease takes effect. You have...
March 1st, 2012.
Or
Or the amended, I'm sorry, the amended would...
He's going to take possession of that when...
Possession of that once Dave's Hot Rod has vacated the facility.
Do we know when that is?
So we would, that
Is it all
past
December
Dave's Hot Rod
1st?
would be, December 1st.
So we should add that in here someplace.
Okay.
Steve, if you want to ask the question, go ahead. Mr. Raethel.
I think the least amount, forget it.
Okay, we've got a motion by Mr. Raethel, supported by Mr. Nardoni, to approve the lease with Monkey Business with the clarification that the lease is going to start on December 1st, 2012. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Item number 8 is subcommittee reports. Seeing none on the agenda, we will move to item number 9, which is discussion items. Item number 9A is building options in the Commerce Park, and included with your information that was included in your packet is sort of a summary of some past ideas for potential building, and they're sort of summarized here. At one point, we did go out for an RFP to hire an architect to look at the conceptual design and layout of building number 63. We had 3 bids, 2 were very close. One was quite a bit higher than the other 2. It was my understanding that we did not move forward with award of this to any of the 3 architects. And with that, I will open it up for discussion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
is this a aviation building? Is this a hangar? Is this a corporate hangar? What specifically is Building 63? I'm not...
Building 63 across the street in our Commerce Park.
Okay. This isn't a spec building, then? This is just...
No.
Okay.
This was the discussion that we had at one point about subdividing the
Right, okay. I'm
into
sorry.
multi-tenant.
All right, I
So-
thought we were talking about a spec building, but this is just subdividing. So this is just an architectural conversation of going out and getting some ideas on how to subdivide 63.
That's correct.
If we choose to move forward.
If you choose to move forward. No bid has been awarded yet. I believe in one of the meeting, you guys were going to authorize a $10,000 spending for one of these. It's just for a conceptual idea of the best layout that we can use the building for.
Hey, Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
I'm confused here. There's an email from Tom Dunn dated February 17, 2010. There's a reference to Tom Dunn here. Are we talking about work that's been done in 2010 where we went to get these bids, or are these new bids?
The one for Tom Dunn, I guess from our last meeting, what was requested was that I bring some information on old buildings we've looked at or ideas in the Commerce Park for new spec buildings or any other ones, and that one was one I found in a folder for 13 units that could be built. It was just a proposal from Tom Dunn
Of a new building.
of a new building, yes.
So what are we talking about right now? Are we talking about going out and deciding whether or not we're going to do an architectural study of Building 63 or a new building?
Either or both. I mean, it could be either way. What direction do we want to move forward? If we want to move forward in either direction with creating a multi-tenant building, do we want to take an existing building and create multi-tenant space, or do we think it's more advantageous to build a new building that's sort of built right from the beginning for that perspective?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stoll?
is this something that would be appropriate for a study session?
You and I are thinking exactly like, I thought the same thing, that this is going to be a much more lengthy discussion and a philosophical one about what we think is the direction that the Airport Commerce Park Commission should take, and I think I would agree with that this could be a hour, 2-hour discussion, and my recommendation would be to set up a study session.
Okay, will do.
That's just my recommendation. I don't know. I'd like to hear from anybody else.
Mr. Chair, I agree. This is, and I referenced a couple times tonight about these conversations in the wintertime, and I think that this is something that we as a commission should put on our list of tasks for this coming winter months to straighten this out, what we want to do. And I think it's a great study session idea that you had, Walt.
Okay. If there's no objection, we will Mike, you and I can get together and we'll pick a couple dates for a study session here in the next couple weeks and see what works for everyone.
Okay.
Next item on the agenda is the chairman's report. The only thing I would like to bring up is an opportunity if we'd like to bring item 7A back up for discussion. If anyone has an appetite to approve that with the review by the legal counsel.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardone.
If I may quickly, I'm sorry for continuing to beat this drum, but I would look to Mr. Stoll or Mr. Rathel to make a motion that is acceptable to them. I think it's our business to take care of this business, and that just kicking the can down the road is not the right thing to do. So I'm more than willing to listen to a proposal other than the motion that was voted on earlier.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Rathel.
there is a question that I have, and I am prepared to vote positively on passing this, subject to legal review. And I'm okay with that. Mr. Duker, please explain to us the revision of 31A, B, and C, and how will that affect us if we want to redesign our boundaries here at the airport to possibly release land for other activity outside of aviation?
Mr. Nardone.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to our airport manager, Mr. Rathel, I don't believe he's in a position to give us an opinion other than an administrative opinion, and I would suggest that you are right on target by suggesting that we need legal counsel to look at those items, and I would support your motion.
However, this is not a legal issue. I'm looking at having the attorney look at this to just approve any kind of legal documentation or agreements that we get into to make sure that there isn't anything that's going to trip us up. Sending this to our attorney will not give him, he does not have any understanding whatsoever of whether or not we want to or don't want to redefine boundaries or do something with our land. So he wouldn't be in a position to be able to say, are you sure that's what you want? This is sort of the pleasure of this commission and understanding of what we want to do as a commission in the future. So a legal review is different than this commission having an understanding of how we want to handle our land in the future. So all I want to know is this revision of 31A, B, and C, does that prohibit us? Does it make it impossible for us to redo our boundaries? Are we able to do something on the north side of our land here that we may want to do here in the future? Does it do anything to tie us up? And I just want to know what we're committing to regarding that. Once I understand that, and if I'm okay with that, then I would be more than happy to send it to the attorney and say, hey, just make sure, read it, make sure we're not getting into anything that we don't want to tie the township into legally. And I would be okay, but there's changes here that I don't know if we fully understand what they're going to do to tie us as an administrative body to do what we may want to do in the future.
I would expect and hopefully understand that when legal review is done, that there would be conversation and discussion between
Specifically,
the airport manager and legal counsel, and the airport manager can bring that up to legal counsel, have that discussion, and if there is some question that's not clear of that language, then we could have legal counsel review that. But again, earlier in the meeting today, we did, I think, all agree that Mr. Duker is new on the job as our airport manager, and I certainly wouldn't expect him to know all the details of this type of language with his short stint so far as the airport manager. So, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, let's ask, we're in open discussion here. Is my point, is it received? I mean, is it,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, what I think I'm hearing Mr. Rathel saying, others disagree, John, please correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that as it relates to those items, those 3 items, as it relates to property disposition particularly, you have a business question about them, not a legal question about them.
correct? Correct.
Is it possible to have the state organization who is asking for us to sign this to come and talk to us?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nardone.
I think that's always a good thing. I expect that Mr. Duker can have that conversation with those folks without us, but what it appears to me, and it's a quick read of it, is it relates to property that's acquired with grant money and disposed of. And it says, the phraseology is basically just how to dispose of real estate that you bought for different reasons. One is for airport noise compatibility purposes. One is for airport development purposes other than noise compatibility. And the last one is aeronautical purposes under C. So I'm not sure exactly what the changes are, but I don't know if they're even substantive from the last document.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Stoll.
If we find out that this is cut in stone, then it really doesn't matter what we decide. If it is not cut in stone, then we need to find out under what we want to negotiate. And if Mr. Rathal has an idea of what he wants to negotiate, then he has to explain that to the rest of us so that we would know what that is.
Okay, I'm going to be, I'll be more generally specific.
Okay?
It says, A, for land purchased under a grant for airport noise compatibility purposes, it will dispose of the land when the land is no longer needed for such purposes at fair market value and at the earliest practicable time. So, what that says is that any land that we have at the airport is to be used for aviation activity. Okay?
If it was purchased with a grant.
And it is. This is our land, okay? So, the portion, and it should be sold at fair market value. The portion of the proceeds, meaning what we sold the land for at fair market value, will go immediately and directly into the operations of the airport. Okay? It can't go to somewhere else. Okay, here's my question. The township hall, okay, is on land similar to all of our land here. It's land that we have to run an airport, and we utilize it to generate revenues for running this airport. The township hall sits here, and the township does not pay the airport any rent or lease for this facility. And the reason that it's set up that way is because having the township here has been far greater of an advantage to this airport than any fiscal amount of money that we would get from the township. They're here, they invest in the airport, they do all kinds of things for us, they bring in all the community activities. So this airport has benefited tremendously. It's saved the airport and turned it into what it is now for basically nothing. We gave them this land here. What happens if we want to do that again? What happens if there's something that comes along that we say, you know what, if we give that land to this purpose, the benefit to the airport would be tremendous. It would just be, it would bring more people down. It would make more people have a positive experience with the airport and increase aviation activity and our community acceptance of this airport. What if that happens? I'm reading this, and it says, under this, nope, you got to sell it at fair market value. And that money will then be used to come to the airport. We wouldn't even be able to be in a position where we could say, listen, we could sell it for fair market value. Let's say it's $100,000. We put $100,000 in there, and then it's done. If we give this land to somebody, if we give this land for a purpose, if we give this land to something in the community that's going to, that benefit would benefit our airport in perpetuity. It helps us guarantee our future. And this is the way that we've always thought down here. It's not totally just financial. What can we get today? What dollar can we get today out of whoever we're dealing with? But what benefit long-term will we get? And sometimes we negotiate leases that are financially better immediately. Sometimes, in the case of the township here, we negotiate a lease that's free. Why? Because the benefit is tremendous. And that's what I don't know what they're asking here. If we pass this, are we tied into doing all of our land transactions at fair market value and at one time give that money that we get for it to the airport? I don't know. If that's the case, I wouldn't be in favor of it. Now, if I want to go back to the state in this unnegotiable document, I want to go back to FAA, sit down with a reasonable person and say, listen, guys, this is the way that we're reading here. But listen, this is what we do. This is how we make sure that we guarantee the success of the airport. We have a greater responsibility to keep this airport financially sustainable than you do. We want to keep it an airport. And we have done a great job since 1971 to make sure that happens. So what this paragraph says is that we have to sell it at fair market value. Is there a way that we could change this for us? I want to have that conversation. And that's all. This is, for me, what it's all about.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardoni.
All good points and understandable. However, we're a little bit of a disadvantage because we don't know if that was even in the last document. The language may have been in the last document.
No, it's new.
Well,
it's all new?
No, I don't think so. And there was a lot of misstatements there. This land was not given to the township. The land that there is no lease for this. It was never done. When we sold the property to the township for the recreational fields, that was a process that we had to go through. It had to be fair market value. All that had to be documented, and that was a 2-year proposition to get that done.
Actually, it was a 4.5-year proposition, and it was only for the township that we released the land to pay the township back for putting a roof on the hangar that we're in right now.
That's correct.
So it was a benefit for the airport and the township to do it.
But it was all done at fair market value because that was the requirement at that time.
It's amazing then how the fair market value of that land just happened to be the exact amount that the roof cost.
No, it's a lot more than the roof. The parking lot was involved. There was a number of things that were involved. It wasn't just a roof for a hangar. But my point is that was a requirement 20 years ago.
Well, and I don't want to try to debate the different paragraphs and the different items of the agreement. What I'd like to do is either send this to legal counsel for review at this meeting, or we'll just deal with it at our next meeting and put it back on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nardoni.
I fully support sending this to legal counsel for review, and I would like to also, I don't know if we don't really have a motion on the floor, but I'd like to make a motion that we do indeed send this to legal counsel for review, and that Mr. Rathel work with the airport manager to make sure that his business issues, which are all of our business issues, are resolved in the process before it goes to the township board. Further, I'm a little confused about one thing. I would expect that no document would go to the township board without having been reviewed by legal counsel. So perhaps this is happening anyway. And
I would assume they would not approve it without, even if we sent it, if it hadn't been reviewed and approved by legal counsel, I would hope that they wouldn't approve it. So I
we would
agree
look
with you
foolish.
100%. We've got a motion by Mr. Nardoni. to approve or send the terms and conditions of the MDOT agreement to legal counsel for review. Any support?
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, and also that Mr. Wraith will be authorized on behalf of this board to work with the airport manager to resolve the business issues as it relates to those particular items we've discussed tonight.
We will add that to the motion.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Raythel.
Okay, I'm okay with that compromise, Joe, all right, but I do want to get the input from the commission here on their thoughts on this particular paragraph of disposal of the land. Would this commission be okay with a clear cut, you have to sell it at fair market value and take the money back and put it immediately into the airport? Or is the commission, do we feel that there are times and situations that it's better for the airport and the Commerce Park to do something that is more creative and maybe less than fair market value, but those decisions are based upon the overall benefit of the airport?
I think anytime we have more flexibility than less, it's better for us managing the property here. And I think at the same time that we're having legal counsel review this agreement, I think, Mike, you ought to be having conversation with MDOT or FAA, I'm not sure who, and find out what type, if any, flexibility we have with negotiating these type of paragraphs in this agreement.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Stoll.
regardless of whether we sign this document or not, if we want to do something with the property on the airport, we're going to have to go to this body anyway and get approval before it happens. Not this body, but the body in Lansing. So
But if you sign
that's
this
all
agreement,
negotiated anyway, right?
well, if you sign this agreement, the answer could be, you would sign this agreement, then you knew when you signed this agreement that this was the way land was supposed to be disposed of.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Nardone.
this is going on way longer than it should, and I apologize because I'm participating in making it go longer, but
And you brought it up again.
I apologize to all. Mr. Duker, do you have the last version of this agreement with you tonight?
I don't.
Okay.
I was unable to find one. I'll search deeper and see if I can locate the previous document. I don't think A would be I think B is more of the concern for airport development purposes, because A seems to be geared more in the first sentence. It says for airport noise compatibility purposes. So the way I read that, or I look at that, is if we had to buy land over here because because the planes coming into the runway kept flying over it and there was a noise complaint, we'd be required to purchase that land. Now, if something comes up, we don't need that land anymore, then they're saying that A pertains to that, then we would have to sell it at fair market value. But now B, I guess my question would be for the land purchase under a grant for airport development purposes, would giving a piece of property away like that be considered airport development purposes, I guess is what needs to be researched in paragraph B there.
Well, I look at it a little differently. I mean, A and B don't apply to us because we've never purchased any land.
Under a grant.
Yeah. So neither one of those apply to us.
Another reason why
Have that
we-
choice, and then we'll be okay.
That's exactly why we need legal counsel review, because we are not attorneys.
That's right.
So I will ask a second time. We have a motion by Mr. Nardone. Is there any support?
I will support it and then go into one last discussion question.
Got a motion by Mr. Nardone, supported by Mr. Rathel. Under discussion, Mr. Rathel.
Is this Juan? Are we dealing with Juan on this, or who's our contact with this?
There's different people. Anu is who handles the contracts, so I can contact her and ask her these questions, pass along the
Can
concerns.
we do that together, since this motion is based on, me working, on this issue with you, that we set up a time as soon as you'd like to do that?
Absolutely, we can do that, and I'll go ahead before we have that meeting and confirm that it's her that we can contact to look into those matters.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Carl, anything?
Let's talk about the last item.
There's been these same requirements for land, and you guys have worked through it, not you, but this entire board and this township has worked through them for many, many, many years. This thing has been revised very minor. I think if we get into it, we're going to find that we're in better shape than we were because of the things that have gone on in the history here. And I would like to volunteer with Mr. Rathel if he'd like me to be there with him, and Mike on this thing. That's why the Airport Advisory Board passed it, because we felt that it was in our best interest.
Absolutely, Carl, that would be great.
Carl, if you're willing to join that discussion conversation, we'd be happy to have you. No other public comment?
But I do have a comment to Carl. Just know, Carl, that this has nothing to do with, certainly I'm speaking for myself, but it has nothing to do with the commitment to aviation and all the projects that we need. And it's just, there's some things that you know, I just want to get clarified before we move forward, but it has nothing to do with a lack of commitment for any projects that we have in aviation, or, you know, the concerns of the pilots here at the airport.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:40.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Cantz.
Support.
Support by Mr. Nardoni. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Motion carries.